Kaylee, and this is my final for prison epistles. An epistle is actually a letter that was written by Paul. So some of these epistles include Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon, which are the four that I'll be covering today. These are written between 61 and 63 AD, and Paul wrote all four of these from Rome while under house arrest. So the first one is Ephesians. This is a letter written to the church in Ephesus, which is a city of Rome in Asia. One of Paul's, I would say, apprentices, but was Timothy, who was the pastor in Ephesus for this church where Paul writes Ephesians. This church was founded on Paul's second journey, and then he went back again and visited it on his journey. So each of these epistles seems to have a theme. So the theme for Ephesians is number one, the church is the body of Christ. Number two, that there's unity in the body. And number three, that God united Gentiles and Jews together. So the church is the body of Christ. This is something that hits really home because I think even if you just think of like your body and being a human, you have to be united. So if your leg doesn't work with your other leg, then you end up tripping. It would be like a three-legged race all the time. If you think about it as well, like your heart has to work through your whole body. Just the same, people of the body of Christ have to work together. And so I think it's also interesting where they say like, where it's said in the Bible that like the eye can't do the job of the foot. And in my brain, I've always had this funny idea. If you put your eyeball on your toe, what would you see all the time? And you would probably see how nasty the ground is that you're looking at, but that's not anything important. So the eyes still have to see and the foot still has to walk. And then the third theme of Ephesians is that God unites the Gentiles and the Jews together. Because especially in this time, there was a lot of like the Jews who stuck by their rules and they did their thing, and then the Gentiles were these other people who were just, they had no responsibility or discipline or those things. And so when Jesus came, God united the Jews and the Gentiles together. There's 6 images in Ephesians, and I really, really enjoy this because I'm a person of imagery. The body, number one, that we already talked about. The temple, which I think is super cool because that's an image that the Jews will understand. Mystery, new man, bride, and soldier. So soldier is one of my favorites. Very similarly because the armor of God is one of my favorite parts of the Bible. So the sword of the Spirit, the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the shoes of the gospel of peace. So these are some of my favorite things. I was also a fan of Bible Man, if you know what Bible Man is. And he was a superhero that like fought evil with Bible verses. I don't know, it was super cool. But this is something that's always stuck with me that I have to repeat to myself, sometimes daily. So these are just some other things that stuck out to me. In chapter 2 where he says, I choose now, because that means that Paul is choosing what's happening now over the past. Of course, the theme of unity, and then in chapter 5 he talks about relations. Next is Philippians. This is known as the Epistle of Joy, the warmest letter. It could also be a thank you note, and Paul founded this on his second journey, and he visited on his third. So the theme of Philippians is have joy even in suffering. I think it's super cool that Paul wants to have joy even in suffering because he was under house arrest and he had a lot of stuff that he went through. So the warning of the Philippians against Judaizers, circumcision, dogs, and then faith in God versus keeping the Jewish tradition. So when it says dogs, I got really interested. And so, of course, I'm reading through all of these epistles as we study them. So in Philippians 3, it says, Further, my brother and my sisters, rejoice in the Lord. It is no trouble for me to write the same things to you again, and it is a safeguard for you. Watch out for those dogs who are evildoers, those mutilators of the flesh. So I thought that was really cool because Paul is using imagery and illusions. Super cool. And then having faith in God versus keeping Jewish law, because sometimes they've been known to keep the Jewish law, but then have no relationship with God. Next is Colossians. Paul never actually visited Colossians, but Timothy did, and so this letter was written by Timothy. The theme of Colossians is Christ alone is supreme. So there's no law, no other religion. religions or anything that is greater than God. So the warnings for the Colossians included warning against a mixture of religions or bad philosophy, and human wisdom versus godly wisdom, because it's all having those old laws. And finally, we get to Philemon. This is a letter to Philemon of Colossae, who was delivered by Onesimus. The theme of this is that Paul encouraged Philemon to treat Onesimus well, and Paul asked Philemon to release Onesimus. And this is because Onesimus was a slave of Philemon. And when he met Paul, Paul wrote the letter to Philemon because Paul was a really respected man. And so when Philemon got this letter, it was Onesimus returning to his master and then graciously asking to be released or treated well. And so this wraps up my presentation for Prison Epistles.